Hello, and welcome to Fandom Spotting. This is episode 29, and I am Yates, your moderator in spirit of today's discussion of Homestuck. We have a really good panel with you today. We have Allison, Amanda, and Jackie, and they're going to take it away from here. Do you guys want to start introducing yourselves?
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll go first. I'm Allison Wilgus. I mostly work in comics these days, but I have spent many years wasting time in fandom as well. So I'm coming both as a Homestuck reader and also a person who is a member of the comics community.
Hi, sorry, I was muted. I am Amanda, and I work at the website Know Your Meme. I'm coming to this as both an internet researcher and a fan of Homestuck, and yeah, I'm a big fan.
I'm Jackie. I don't have any fancy credentials like the other two. I'm just a fan with a Tumblr, so I'll be that person in the group.
You probably know more about what's actually going on in fandom than either one of us, then.
We'll see. Okay, so I suppose we should just we already sort of introduced who we are and where we can be found in fandom, I think. I know I have a link to my Tumblr up for mine, and I know Amanda does too, and Allison, I think you kind of mentioned where you're at.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it.
I'm looking at what kind of things we can talk about. I guess maybe we can just discuss how we got into Homestuck personally and how we got into the fandom, maybe what we contribute to the fandom, if anything. So,
do we want to just sort of move left to right across the little
Sure.
at the bottom here? I'll just embarrass myself while you guys think about what you want to say. So, I mean, basically, I used to read Fandom Secrets, although I don't really anymore, and I am one of those people who started reading Homestuck because there kept being all these grave-faced weirdos and all these fandom secrets, and I finally just got so irritated about not knowing what everybody else was talking about that I sat down and read the comic largely out of spite. And this was, gosh, oh my god, it was several years ago. It's weird to me. I feel like I'm a newbie who just started reading the comic, but I think I've been reading it for like over 3 years at this point. But yeah, I just ended up blasting through the archives just in time for things to start getting really insane. And then I then had my roommate read it, and so now the two of us have just been obsessively following the comic ever since. Well, it's very strange, because I'm only kind of in fandom in that, like, I follow fandom Tumblrs, and I have some people who are more in fandom than I am. So it seems like I only ever see about 10% of whatever crazy thing is going on. Mostly people talking about how there's a crazy thing going on, not actually the crazy thing. So I'll be very interested to hear what all of you guys have to say, probably being more involved in day-to-day way, whereas I'm mostly like, there's this really awesome piece of fan art, or this comic is great, and I wish more people read it, and that's most of my experience with Homestuck these days. Sorry.
Don't feel like a noob. I am much more of a noob than you are. I tried to read Homestuck several times on my own, and I just didn't have the time, or I would get through like a few pages and be like, oh, I need to go to bed, I need to do this other thing. And I actually sat down and read it after Gamzee was killed, and you find out that he's wearing a fake God Tier costume. And
oh gosh, that's really recent.
Yeah, I know.
That's super recent.
It's super embarrassing, but I blew through the archive in about 2 months. And my boyfriend and I actually read it aloud to each other, which...
Oh, that's adorable!
Yeah, it was what made me like sit and read it, being able to kind of give the characters a voice, and we just got so sucked in. It's embarrassing. We spend so many days just spending like 8 hours on Homestuck, and
That's not embarrassing, that's awesome.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Also bonding.
Yeah, and that's devotion to the media for sure.
Definitely. He's in my picture. We are being
oh, there he is.
Together. And yeah, so I don't really make fan art or anything because I can't draw, but I have my own Homestuck Tumblr, and I reblog all my favorite things, and my most participation in the fandom is when there's an update or when something like really crazy is happening. So like Fandomstuck and the AUs. I love exploring that and where they come from and why people are doing this kind of thing.
I wouldn't say actually that I'm like, I don't feel like I'm a noob. Like, I've never said that word before in my life.
Sorry.
I started reading kind of at like a whim a couple years ago. I remember when I finally caught up, it was like 4/13, like the actual date, 2011. Because I remember being like, I don't understand why this date is significant, which probably is not a glowing recommendation of my knowledge set. But I started reading it, and I may have kind of blown through the first couple acts, and I might have been drinking at the time, so sometimes they'll reference really early stuff, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. I don't understand. I mean, I don't want to say that I'm one of those people that was like, I just skipped to Act 5 because I wanted to see the trolls. Like, I didn't know what was happening. I just kind of was clicking back and forth. But I, like, very, very strongly remember the moment where, and it has to do with trolls, so it's going to make me sound like one of those people, but I'm not. The part where Vriska was dying, and she wrote, like, kill me on her face, and she wrote it in her, she made Tavros write it with her blood everywhere, and I remember thinking, this could be a really powerful medium. Like, this is something that might be a little bit bigger than just, like, a comic. And with each different flash and each thing, just getting more and more involved with it. My contribution to fandom, you know, I'm not a fan artist. I do a lot of cosplay. The picture in my display image is actually me. And on my Tumblr, there's, especially recently, because there were a couple cons I was at, there's a lot of cosplay there. So I guess I can come from that aspect. I've got a lot of other friends who are kind of big in that, and so that's kind of what I can at least contribute to the discussion, and other things too. So.
You know, it's funny talking about not remembering earlier stuff in the comic because I'm gonna make a confession here, especially because of the reading out of spite beginning of my Homestuck experience.
Sure.
I shamelessly skimmed the chat logs when I first started reading it.
I didn't realize they could expand for like a while.
No.
Yeah,
like all of a sudden I was like, wait, what are we talking about? And someone was like, you're not expanding them.
And then even when I realized that I should be reading them, when it got to the trolls, I was like, oh, fuck this. It's weird typing quirks, and I kept like super skimming them. And I later went back and I reread almost everything that I had not read properly the first time, mostly because I got irritated at not remembering it very well. But it's just bizarre to me that because I so distinctly remember even like Vriska, which in retrospect is like super low-key troll quirk, me getting really irritated, and now it's like completely transparent. Like it has to get to God, what's his name? Matuna?
Oh,
it has to get to Matuna level.
That's not even like a typing quirk. It's just
nonsense.
Gibberish.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Yeah, so like Matuna, I'm like, no, I'm not trying to decipher the meaning from this. But now, like, I've just casually blazed through Tavros and Vriska giant chat logs without even thinking about it, and I'm like, what have I become?
Well, I think if you're doing the reading it out loud, you can definitely avoid that. Because I know Jade really wanted to read, well, she wanted to read Homestuck, but she didn't want to read it. So whenever she'd come over, we'd just have like sessions where we'd put like a chat log out and I would read it out loud in different voices. And Amanda, it sounds like that's what you did with your boyfriend.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Also, once I found out about the wiki, that helped a lot.
Yeah.
Like, I would watch a flash and be like, okay, what now? And then I would read the summary on the wiki, and then I'd be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I remember that from after Cascade, like watching Cascade and being like, oh my god. Yeah, I don't know what just happened.
Yeah, I'm a shameless abuser of other people's hard work in order to understand a giant, elaborate webcomic.
Well, I think that the wiki is kind of a necessity for some. I mean, I'm sure that there are some people who are listening to this right now that are just like raging, like, I don't need the wiki. I understand what's going on. You guys are cheating. But I think for most people, because of the dearth of information, is dearth the right word? I'm not sure. Because of the volume of the information that is in the comic, having a wiki to consult is definitely helpful, I would say.
Yeah, and I've used it a lot less recently. Although I think the big narrative flashes are more when that comes in because they're so information dense.
Yeah, and there's no well, in some flashes there's talking, but there's no speech, so you're not entirely sure what it is that you're seeing. You have to just go by visually, and
Yeah.
sometimes you're like, where are we? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I mentioned that I thought it would be fun if we could try and sum up Homestuck in one sentence for people who are watching this and haven't tuned out already that are like, I have no idea what Homestuck is and I don't understand what's happening.
Okay, Homestuck in one sentence.
I have a sentence if you guys aren't ready.
Do it.
If I could sum up Homestuck in one sentence, I would say that it is a comic about 4 kids who played a video game that inadvertently ended the world.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's about kids and aliens joining forces to save the universe from complete annihilation.
Wow, the sentence that I thought of was so much different. If I was telling someone about Homestuck that has never heard of it, I would talk more about the medium. And it is a webcomic that utilizes Flash and video games and IM language to convey a story of these kids that can only be told right now.
Yeah, I guess internet native webcomic is definitely
Oh,
internet native
yeah.
webcomic. That sounds weird. Internet native comic is probably a good way of, because I think webcomic ends up feeling like a transitional form when you read something like Homestuck.
Well, when you think of webcomic, you think like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You don't think of this huge thing that Homestuck has become. Like, I remember at one point when people are always complaining that it's not updating enough, but that as he said, you know, most comics update Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and most comics have this much, you know, dialogue, this much word, this much story. Based on what I have, I could not update for, what was it, like 7 years, and he would still be ahead of most comics. I mean, that was kind of extreme, but I mean, I thought it was a good point that needed to be made.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that Homestuck has made me a little crazy occasionally because of not only the constant updates, but the super erratic nature. Like, when he's on a tear, it could be like 3 in the afternoon, and so it's got to the point where I just continuously would reload my phone. Like, I live in New York City, so like the subway would come above ground for like the 5 minutes it takes to go across the bridge, and I'd take my phone out to... And sometimes it would have updated in like the 15 minutes since I'd got on the subway, and of course then the behavior gets rewarded, so then...
Right.
Yeah.
Further...
Update culture.
Yeah, it's terrible. And then you always have to tweet about the update. It's terrible.
Oh, always.
I'm a terrible person.
I always remember, because there's like, usually when he's just like big updates or something like that, they happen at like weird times, like in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden, if you're like awake in the middle of the night, you're rewarded.
Yeah.
But I'll always remember this. There was a summer I was living in Tokyo, and so late at night for everyone in America is a totally different time. It was about like 6 in the evening in Japan, and it was the update when Karkat and Terezi and Kanaya and Solix were going to go confront Gamzee, and so it was that flash update where it starts to spin around as they're all going to confront him, and right as it started, an earthquake happened.
Oh my god!
So it was playing that music, and it was like summer of 2011, so it wasn't, you know, the big one, but it was a rather large earthquake, and so I was like sitting at my table watching it, and then finally I was like, I have to get under the table. So I'm underneath the table with my hands over my head as it's like playing this horrifying music with honks, and I was like, I'm never gonna get over this.
Oh wow.
No. So I don't know, should we talk about our favorite characters, or
Yeah, what's
next on the list here?
Oh yeah, characters. Favorite characters and why? I guess we could talk about that and then just kind of go into a general conversation about, you know, characters, kids, and trolls, and well, you guys can see what I'm talking about. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I also skipped the where the story is at bullet point if we want to.
That's fine. We can just go to characters. The story is at no one knows.
Yeah, that's actually pretty accurate. The story is also at a place where if you're not reading the comic, it's almost impossible to explain where the story is at to somebody who isn't reading the comic.
Yeah.
Like, my roommate and I and my husband will frequently be hanging out together. My husband has not really read Homestuck yet, although he plans to, but we don't even worry about spoiling him because everything we say is completely incomprehensible.
I remember my roommate didn't follow Homestuck, but, you know, she's my roommate, so she would know when stuff was going on. Or she would kind of see from Tumblr that something was happening. And so every so often she'd be like, I heard that something bad happened in Homestuck. Is it okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be fine. Don't worry about it.
Although, you know, things that are bad happening in Homestuck just mean something very different than things that are bad happening in almost any other narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, so they died. They've died like 3 times already, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really interesting aspect of Homestuck, that, like, there's no permanence in death, but it's still supposed to mean something.
Well,
Like,
they just keep upping the death stakes.
yeah, like, what was it when, like, Lord English was, like, getting rid of all the ghosts, and you could see the ghost die, and I was like, wait, no ghost can die?
Well, yeah, that's like mega death. It's like mega triple death.
Right, but then you have to, like, you get both sides of the coin. Like, you're like, oh god, ghosts can die, but then you have Vriska being like, oh, I'm just, you know, using these ghosts as bait, and you're like, wait, is it not that big of a deal, or is Vriska just being Vriska again?
No, she's awful. I mean, I love Vriska, but no, she's completely terrible. Although, that reminds me, like, I have a confession, so you guys can all feel superior to me.
Mm-hmm.
Karkat is totally my favorite character.
Well,
I'm that lame fangirl who just really likes Karkat.
That's not bad.
Everybody's favorite character has got to be Karkat.
I know, it's terrible. It makes me feel like such a plebe.
But he's perfect. Well, he's not perfect. He's awful, but
his little nubby horns and his growly face.
How can you not like Karkat, though?
I don't understand people that don't like Karkat.
I think some people don't like him because they're sick of him.
Oh, I suppose.
Fair enough.
I remember when I finished and caught up, Karkat was missing, essentially. Like, he had just talked to Gamzee and was, like, going off. And so, like, we didn't know where he was. Like, Terezi was trying to find Gamzee, and I just remember being like, I know I just started reading, but if Karkat dies, I'm out. And I think I still kind of feel that way. Well, I'd still read, but I'm like, well, I know there's some people who are like, Karkat should die. Like, you know, it would up the stakes a lot, but I don't want him to die. I don't know if that makes him my favorite character. I just want him to be happy.
You enjoy his comic company.
Yeah.
Yeah, and although it's funny though. Like, I don't know how many have all of you been reading since before the Beta Kids showed up? I'm trying to remember.
Oh, you mean the Alpha Kids, like
Alpha Kids? Yes, I'm sorry. Like the Roxy and Dirk and everything. The timeline sometimes gets messed up.
Yeah, they showed up November 2012. I remember because I was in Costa Rica and I was there for a wedding, and so I like loaded it up, and all of a sudden like Jane showed up, and I didn't understand that the scratch meant there were going to be new kids, and I just remember staring at the screen and being like, the hell is this?
Yeah, and it's just I mention only because like it's for one, it does not seem like it was that long ago, but it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been like 2 years.
Yeah,
well, a year and a half.
Yeah, and in addition to that, like, I just remember everybody grumbling about, oh, these new characters, and I want to know what's happening with John, and where's Dave, and whatever. And now, like, it's like he just, it's like, Hussey, he won, man. Like, he won. He looked us in the eye, and he's like, I'm going to make you care about an entirely separate cast of characters.
Right. Like, that's an interesting thing about Homestuck, that there's constantly these things in storytelling and media that people will say, like, there's no way you could ever do this, and Homestuck kind of, like, smashes it. Like, you can't have a webcomic that's this, like, prose heavy, that's this text heavy. No, you can do that. You can't have
for better or for worse, there's no editor or producer or anybody to come in and talk him out of it.
Right, and in some ways that's good, and in some ways that's bad. There's no checking. No one's checking it.
I disagree.
Right up.
The fandom definitely checks him after he puts it up, like in the Caucasian incident. And yeah, while there's no editor before he puts it up, he is then the fandom is his editor.
That's true.
Right.
And they do play a huge role.
I wonder if that's just a recent development, or if that's the fandom is his editor when he allows them to be his editor, or otherwise.
Yeah, I think it's more that ultimately nobody can keep him from doing whatever he's going to do. Like they can obviously they can protest, and he can decide whether or not he's going to take that seriously. But I guess what I mean is like there's no gateway between him and putting this stuff out there. And I mean, it's true that's true for most webcomics, but I feel like there's a fearlessness to what he's doing. Like, I'm sure he doesn't actually not give a shit, but he writes his comic as if he doesn't give a shit.
Right,
Like,
and I mean,
whatever,
to some people that's commendable, and to some people that's despicable.
yeah.
I was going to ask a question as the uneducated participant in this discussion, or non-participant. Do you think that the creator has been impacted at all by the popularity? Do you think that the types of stories have changed, or do you think it's all completely part of, a predetermined Calvinistic, plan that was going at the very beginning?
Well, I mean, the story's definitely been shaped by the fandom. I mean, like,
Yes, that's a better way of putting my question. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm sure that he would have done this comic even if it had not ever become any more popular than previous things that he'd already done. But I'm pretty sure that the scope and the ambition of it, that there's a feedback loop there between him and the people reading the comic. Like, they pump energy and enthusiasm into the story, and he rewards them by doing more and more crazy, ambitious bullshit.
I mean, I think that I'm like agreeing and disagreeing with you at the same time, saying like I think the narrative was planned. Like, I don't think that fandom has affected how the story is actually going to go. Like, I think that A, B, C, and D points were planned out, and they're still going to be hit regardless of if it's popular or not popular. And I think he reacts to like the energy and the people that respond to it in the fandom, but I think in very small, like, subtle ways, like little, like, I feel like it's more like digs at people, like, oh, you thought this was important? Oh, you're bored of hearing Vriska talk all the time? Too bad. Or you want to hear more about this? Too bad, we're going to talk about a salamander for like 20 minutes.
Yeah, the self-aware nature is definitely, it's awesome because there aren't a lot of narratives that are this involved where the author is talking back and having this kind of discussion in the actual narrative itself. But at the same time, it's like, really, can't you just play into us just a little bit?
It's been interesting watching him kind of just figure out what his level of engagement with fandom is going to be. Because I certainly feel like a lot of authors have made the mistake of connecting too directly and in the wrong ways with their fandom. And I think there's been some missteps. Like, there's been some stuff that he's done that I've kind of squinted at, and I'm like, I don't really know if that's what I would have done. On the other hand, some of that stuff has been borne out in a way I wouldn't have expected. Like, I was really irritated during that whole period when, like, the whole race of the characters question came up, and there was a lot of really long Tumblr essays that he was writing about it, and the whole, like, oh, they don't have a race. Like, I remember kind of rolling my eyes at that at the time. But on the other hand, as much as I wasn't super thrilled with some of what he was saying and the way in which he was saying it at the time, you now, in fandom, can basically do whatever you want in terms of drawing those characters or cosplaying as them regardless of race, and nobody can give you shit about it. Like, in a weird, like, you can point to the official canon, the creator said this, and he has explicitly given me permission to draw Dave as a black man with dreadlocks, so fuck you.
I just think it's crazy. Yeah, no, I just think it's crazy that, I mean, maybe this exists in other fandoms, but the fact that, like, there's this kind of obsession in Homestuck with, like, this, like, it's not canon, so it's not worthwhile. Like, those kind of wars where it's like, well, it's canon that they're white, that, like, the creator has to come out and say, I don't care if you draw them any way, do whatever you want, it's fine. And, like, that he had to say that, or people were still gonna fight, like, that's kind of where it becomes strange to me that, like, why do we need the creator to come out and tell us it's okay to do this and that about, like, fandom works? Like, it's just fan works. We don't.
Yeah.
No one can tell us what we can and can't do.
I both completely agree with what you're saying, but I also think it's interesting that the fact that he did say this meant that, I mean, there was a noticeable uptick in the sort of, I mean, for lack of a better way to put it, like, the diversity of fan work after that whole thing happened. Like, I think for some people it hadn't occurred to them that they could do something like that. And then they were like, oh, okay, well, this is the thing that everybody's doing now. Like, it was just interesting to me how that played out. But, I mean, I agree that he shouldn't be having to issue proclamations to keep people from being awful to each other. I just thought it was just really interesting to kind of watch it happen from like my
Unfold.
place mostly outside of it.
It looks like we got a question. It's over in the chat, but it says, as a non-fan, is this a canon where the stakes are not sufficiently high? It seems like they are pretty high. Because we were talking about how now the stakes pretty much started really high when it was like, oh, you put in a disc and now a meteor's going to hit Earth. Like, the stakes were already really high, and they just keep getting higher.
I don't know how he's done it, because it totally goes against all sort of understood conventions about how you're supposed to do this kind of story and like how you're supposed to manage your magic system so that it feels like it has stakes. But I feel like he's both been able to constantly introduce crazy new concepts into the, I mean, for lack of a better word, the magic system of the world, and yet I feel like you always understand what the stakes are. You always understand what people are trying to do and what's preventing them from doing it. And you always are sort of concerned that they're going to sort it out. I'm not entirely sure how he's managed to do that, but I don't think at any point I was just sitting there being like, well, whatever, nothing matters anymore. Like, he both continuously escalates it, and yet is always sort of grounding you in what that escalation actually means for the characters, if that makes any sense.
I felt like I was talking too much. I was waiting for Amanda to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting that I'm muted, and I start talking, and then I'm like, oh, I am talking at no one. Yeah, I agree. Like, in my reading, I've only had this short amount of time where I've been allowed to be surprised. I had all these spoilers when I started reading, and I was like, oh yeah, I know these kids are coming, and I know the trolls are coming, and I know all this stuff is going to happen. But in the time where I have been allowed to be surprised, it's all stuff that I would have never expected. And I've read theories. I'm a huge fan of Blade Kind Eyewear, and like all the stuff that happens where people theorize what's going to happen, and it always just blows my mind what Hussey comes up with and how crazy it can be, but yet it's still just like, oh, this makes total sense once you see it.
He has great gotcha moments, but not. That's the wrong word. He has great moments of
yeah,
shit.
Surprise moments.
Like, God, the last update with like he pulls back and then like you see that ring that Vriska has been tricking him into making, and then it's like the disc, and that whole last update was a whole series of, oh man, jeez, like all the pieces kind of coming together in this very satisfying,
yeah, it was awesome,
and yet totally mystifying way.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that kind of explains, like, yeah, the stakes have always been high, but they keep getting higher because he keeps like throwing new stuff at you.
Yeah.
I mean, I know for me, like, I was like reading it, and I had been drinking, and I'm sort of like skimming through things, and I'm checking the wiki, and I'm fine. But I remember I was putting on makeup and getting ready to go to class, and I was reading, and then all of a sudden, Aridin kills Pfeffery and Kanaya and Blind Solix, and I'm like, I got like makeup half on my face, and I was like, the shit is happening? I mean, like, and when you go back and you read it, you're like, of course that was going to happen. All this stuff, has been kind of hinted at and told to you from the beginning, that this stuff is going to go bad. But you're still surprised when it does somehow. Like, he kind of lulls you into this sense of complacency, like, oh, it'll be fine. Everyone says this will be fine. We'll be able to figure it out. Oh, shit, everything went wrong. Oh, they're better. They're ghosts now. We're in some dream bubbles. Oh, wait, ghosts can die. And so... yeah, that's the best way I can explain that the stakes have always been high, but somehow they just keep the ceiling keeps rising on us, I think.
Also, I feel like that section was the first time where we really sort of, as readers, are kind of forced to understand that the trolls are not just human kids with weird makeup, like that they've got their own crazy interpersonal thing that they're doing, and that murdering each other on an asteroid just doesn't mean the same thing to them that it means to the
right, but it still means that to us, and so
exactly.
Like trying to understand that, and that, I mean, I think it's also good. I think Karkat is a pretty good main character for the trolls because he kind of has. I think that he interprets things more as a human than an actual troll. So like,
that's why he's such a weirdo.
Right, so when bad stuff happens, he's kind of like our window into that world because he can be like, oh my god, this is awful, whereas all the other trolls are like, I don't know, it's not so bad. And he's like, no, it's awful and everything's ruined. And I'm like, good. I'm glad Carcat feels that way because I do too.
I'm looking at our helpful planning doc here, and it's funny because there's somebody wrote characters, how many is too many, and it occurs to me that I think a lot of what Hussey is really good at doing is stuff that is very easy to take for granted. And one of those things is, I was sitting here, I was looking through like the wiki, through the giant list of like, God, how many, there's like 36 different trolls now, right? There's the original trolls, and then there's the ancestors, and then there's the Teensesters, right? Like,
Dancestors, descendants and ancestors, Dancestors.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, and yet, if you asked me, I'd be able to tell you the personality and the basic thing of every single one of those characters.
Mm.
There's this just gigantic cast of characters, and yet I have a very solid sense of even the exiles, of like who they are and what they're I mean, the only exception to that being like I'm that asshole who totally skipped the
intermission?
The intermission, the first. I mean, I did go back and read it the second time.
But they're important now.
And I
see?
I did the same thing. It's okay.
You guys have to learn who the felt is now. It's important.
I've reread it since, but at the time, it was just like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And I was also in super catch-up mode. I'm like, this doesn't really affect anything right now. Let's just go. And then when it came back, I was like, great, now I have to go back and reread it. I've lost so much stuff. But I think that's kind of the nature of the narrative. Like, I can't imagine having read it from the beginning, and it kind of just blows my mind how that would have... Like, what would have happened if you were reading it at that time and you got to that intermission? Like, what was the response of the fandom at that point?
Well, I know a lot of the commentary that he's had about it is that this isn't supposed to be like a comic that you're reading like each time that it updates. He's like, it's better to read from the archive. And so I remember like when I was reading the archive, I was like, yeah, I feel like I'm understanding things. I'm getting all this information at once. And then once it started to be like the day-by-day updates, it really changed the way that the story was presented to me since like 2011, since I got caught up. And to now, the story is a totally different animal, I feel, in my brain than it was when I was reading from the archives. So I think if you caught up recently, then it's, you know, they're still pretty closely linked in your mind. But to me, like, what the fandom is, what it is that I'm reading now is totally different from when I was reading from the archives. So I try and think about what it would be like if I was reading this all in one big chunk, then an update today, an update 2 days from now, an update, like, what, like 3 months from now is what we're looking at now?
Yep.
Man, although I think that a lot of people are going to read it, this is the first big hiatus since the Kickstarter.
Well, yeah, but I mean, we had a pretty big one before Cascade. Like, I remember...
Oh, yeah.
That big...
A lot of people caught up then.
Yeah, I
was
remember...
Gonna say is I feel like a lot of people are going to read it during this hiatus because we haven't had a big hiatus since the Kickstarter went up, which is when it came under a lot of people's radar for the first time. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be reading it this summer while they're, you know, sitting at their grandma's house on vacation or whatever it is.
I hope we're not waiting till, like, I hope it's not like 6 months. I'm hoping it's just like Cascade again, but maybe it will be longer. Because what, Cascade was like August to October? October 25th was when Cascade happened, and August was when I was still in Tokyo when the earthquake happened, so we were still getting updates then. So I guess only like 2 months, 1 month, so maybe it will be much longer.
I've been preparing myself for sort of Avatar Season 2 hiatus type hiatus.
Oh no, that was awful.
My body is ready. Like,
wait, so at Comic-Con is he gonna present the trailer for the next?
Awesome.
That actually sounds really awesome.
He just shows up at like at the meetup with like his laptop and just opens it up. He's, you know, puts some sunglasses on and then just.
That sounds magical.
And like 315-year-olds lose their shit. That would be great.
I mean, I don't know if you guys do anything that has to do with conventions and stuff, but I remember being at a meetup for Homestuck, and everyone's talking, and everyone's in their costumes and all these things, and then all of a sudden somebody was like, update! And everyone had to like check their phones.
Oh my goodness.
Someone had brought a computer, And it was one of the updates, one of the walk around games, and I was like, oh, I gotta get out of here because it was no way that we were all gonna huddle around one computer.
Yeah, that's one way to disperse a meetup real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Let's see what else.
Yeah, I was at. I've been to a few cons since the Homestucks thing happened. I was at Otakon last summer. That was interesting. Giant number of people.
Yeah, I mean, I always kind of feel weird, like, doing conventions in Homestuck cosplay, because there are some people that are really excited, but then there are some people who are really, especially if it's like an anime convention, you know, they can be, you know, but no one is, I've never, I went to a convention in January, and apparently there were a lot of negative and nasty comments leading up to the convention that were like, if somebody's dressed up as Homestuck, you better watch your back, you know, a lot of stuff like that. And so there was, you know, a formal notice if you're going to be cosplaying Homestuck, you know, stay in groups, make sure to, you know, don't do anything that would be, you know, dangerous.
Damn!
Right, and nothing ever came up of it. It was just, you know, teenagers talking shit. But I remember on one of the last days of the convention, I was going up, you know, those really scary, like, kind of abandoned stairwells in the corner of a hotel because the elevator's taking too long. And so we were in Homestuck cosplay, a friend and I, another girl, and we hear the door a couple floors up open and close, and we can hear footsteps coming down the steps. And I turned to my friend and I said, you know, this is exactly what they told us we really shouldn't do when we're dressed up as trolls.
Oh,
and
no.
she was like, oh, God, yeah. So we're walking up the stairs, they're walking down the stairs, and we're getting closer, and we're getting closer, and we're getting closer. And they come around the corner, and it's some guy dressed as March Airden. And I was like, you might actually be in more danger than we are right now. So just kind of this, you know, other fandoms hate you and you better watch out. And then when you actually kind of take that mindset, maybe it's not a reality. I don't know. I kind of wanted to talk about that, the reaction that the Homestuck fandom garners in other canons.
Well, what's interesting for like the cosplay thing is, and I've watched this happen to a few people that I know, where like I think the people who don't know anything about Homestuck tend to think that the only Homestuck cosplayers are the people like the gray face people.
Right.
Like they're like, oh, there's some gray face people. They're like the Homestucks or whatever. And then if they actually start reading the comic, like I've talked to people right after, like when they're at their first con after having read the comic, and they look at me, they're like, there are way more Homestuck cosplayers than I thought. I thought it was just I'm like, yeah, you don't even fucking know. Like,
so many.
And all of a sudden, it's like your eyes open and you see like the 30 Daves that you didn't even notice before.
30 Daves.
Well, because seriously.
No, it's true. There's like a million Daves.
Every blonde teenage boy is like, hey, well, just get the t-shirt and put some glasses on, and then chicks like me. It's like, whatever. I mean, I don't blame him. That's what I would do about it.
Hey, if that's working for you, go with it.
Yeah, no, seriously, don't even have to wear a wig. But yeah, it's been really infuriating, actually, though, watching fandom people be terrible about Homestuck stuff.
Yeah.
It's just bizarre. It's like, dude, it's like any other fandom that has a lot of teenagers in it. It's just bigger.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of con experience, but what I've seen online and the stuff that's happened, especially with Fandomstuck and when people began making the Homestuck style fandom characters, and just the response to that by some of the other fandoms, it's like, we are an equal fandom. I don't really understand all of this hate and why it's all directed like in one direction, you know?
I think people are irritated because it's not something you can just consume in a weekend. So like it feels very, I think some people make it feels very in-clubby to them.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people, I mean, I know for me when I started reading it, I was like, this is impossible. I'm never going to be able to get through this. So I can imagine if someone was like, hey, these people are having fun, I want to have fun too, and then they look at the medium and they're like, I can't. I physically can't get through all of this. I have a life. I can't read all of this. These jerks are having fun in a place that I can't have fun. Yeah. I wonder if that's part of it, or if just, I mean, some people are really happy to be negative and mean and cruel to each other, and if that's what they like, then that's what they like. But
that's the internet for you.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Harry Potter fandom, so
We just got a question in the corner that I can't answer that has to do with Harry Potter. But it says, is Homestuck the new Harry Potter in terms of reaction by other fans in different fandoms?
No, because I think that everybody has an opinion about Harry Potter, and part of what made Harry Potter such a weird fandom is that there were so many non-fandom people who were reading it. Like, tons of people who'd never been in fandom before were suddenly giant fanfic BNFs or running archives or whatever, and that's part of what made that fandom so strange. And also, like, anybody who'd ever read the books could just go online and draw fan art or whatever, whereas I feel like Homestuck is a much more intense fandom. Like, everybody who's participating is participating. Like,
yeah, it's a lot more intense and a lot more insular. Harry Potter was everywhere. Anyone could easily like go to the movies and be like, "Oh, I'm a Harry Potter fan. I'm going to participate in the fandom and cosplay."
My mom has read the Harry Potter books.
Yeah, exactly. Your mom hasn't read Homestuck.
She never will.
Yeah.
God, hopefully.
That is a terrible thing, though. Like, from an academic perspective, I love Homestuck for its narrative, for its literature value, for its references to theory, and a lot of theorists and academics won't touch it because A, it's a webcomic, and B, all the fans are teenagers. And it's just rife. Someone needs to do a Homestuck thesis, and yes, if I ever do a PhD, that's what it's going to be, but it's just so inaccessible right now, and it's terrible.
Well, so I'm gonna go ahead and skip ahead a little bit to something else that on our outline, since we're talking about it already, in terms of, yeah, man, it's really frustrating how much people who should be paying attention to Homestuck are not paying attention to Homestuck. They don't know. I don't think anybody knows what to do with it. Like, they can't read it, or they tell themselves that they can't because it's too long.
Yeah, it's a lot of telling yourself that you can't.
Yeah,
well, I think also while it's still updating too. I mean, it's hard to. I mean, from someone who, well, not a PhD thesis, but someone writing a thesis, it's very difficult to do it with something that's constantly changing, that's constantly updating. Like, of course, a lot of things, well, most things in life are constantly changing and constantly updating. But with something like Homestuck, like if you were going to write a thesis about it now in a 6-month break would probably be the time. But
yeah, and I think that, I mean, I had a conversation the other day which is super typical of, I think, how a lot of people are dealing with this. A friend of mine who works at a publisher as a PR, she's a publicist basically, and she was saying about how her editor wants somebody to explain Homestuck to her, which I was like, oh, that's good, because that's much better than a few months ago where she would never have heard of it to begin with. And my friend was like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, I read the first book, and because that's how.
Oh no.
Well, because that's how. That's what they're waiting for, because it's a webcomic. So what you do is you wait for the book, because that's how it's done. Like, even Penny Arcade has books, and I think that I own the first book, but I haven't actually sat down and read it, although I've been meaning to, because I'm curious about how successfully he
transfers flashes.
Although, honestly, it's really going to be hard to say until he gets further along to where you start having these giant, crazy flashes and, like, all that.
Right. I mean, how are you going to make Cascade into a book? Is it going to be its own flip book?
It's going to be like a book all on its own. You know,
Yeah.
And I do think that he's dedicated to it, because I think that he understands that for some people that's just going to be the only way they're going to be interested in reading it. And I think he's pretty committed to eventually getting through it, even if it takes him like 10 years to do the whole series that way, although I bet he has to outsource. No, he won't outsource it. He's too crazy.
Well, he made that poster, he had to sign all those posters, and he's like, there's a concern that there are too many posters in the room and the floor will give out. And I was like,
Oh, yeah.
This is unreal. Like, people need to deal with how huge this fandom response is to this, and how small the actual processing facility is to try and get this out to that many people. Like, $2.5 million.
Yeah, so do we want to talk about the Kickstarter now? Like,
Yeah, definitely.
So, okay, I sat down, and do you guys mind if I just talk about the numbers for a second?
No, go ahead.
Go for it.
I'm sorry. I feel like I'm... Anyway, so I sat down this morning, and I went and I looked at the numbers for a few Kickstarters that sort of, for some reason, kind of felt like a useful comparison. There's the Penny Arcade Sells Out Kickstarter, the Veronica Mars Movie Project, and the Homestuck Adventure Game. And what was interesting to me was that both the Penny Arcade and the Veronica Mars Movie Kickstarters, I think, were super talked about at the time, like very much like pointed to as like being like relevant, like this is the future of media, this is what people are doing, particularly the Veronica Mars Movie Project. And I feel like with the Homestuck Adventure Game, there were like maybe 5 blog articles that I read at the time, like one per major video game outlet.
The Homestuck one felt very much like if you didn't know someone that was into Homestuck, you weren't going to hear about the Kickstarter. But
yeah, exactly.
Veronica Mars and the Penny Arcade one, if you knew about comics, you heard about it, or if you knew about video games. And Veronica Mars was...
It was everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, they just funded a movie, so...
Yeah, so...
The local news covered it.
Yeah, so for anybody who might be listening to this, I'm going to run down through the numbers, just starting with Penny Arcade and going to the Homestuck Adventure Game, just so that we're all on the same page here. Apologize to you guys because you've already read this. So Penny Arcade Sells Out had 9,000 backers. I'm going to round a little bit so this doesn't take forever. It had 9,000 backers. It raised $528,000 past their $250,000 goal. That's 211% of their goal. The average contribution was $58. Then there's a Veronica Mars, so that's modest, but a lot of money. That's a lot of money. It's more than what they wanted, and they funded the crazy strip search thing, so clearly it was very successful, and strip search has since gone on to be a big thing, so that's great. And then we have the Veronica Mars Movie Project, which had 91,000 backers, raised $5.7 million, past their $200 million goal. The average contribution, although interestingly, was almost the same as the Penny Arcade one. It was $62. So that's Veronica Mars. And
just to pop in for a second, the average Kickstarter donation in general is $71.
Oh, wow.
So that's really interesting. I didn't know that. So both Penny Arcade and Veronica Mars are a little bit below the average there then. And then we have which I think makes sense to a certain degree, because I think that for both Penny Arcade, it started out as being a more fund our comic not having ads thing. And Veronica Mars, I think people have the sense that maybe the movie will happen and maybe they won't. So there's a part of it, it's kind of like a faith thing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm contributing to this because I like this thing. Anyway.
Sure, yeah.
So anyway, now we have the Homestuck Adventure Game. It had 24,000 backers, which is significantly less than the Veronica Mars one. It raised $2.4 million, which is 355% of its goal. The average contribution was $102. And I want to remind people, this is a fandom where the average age of the fan is too young to have a credit card. And I also want to point out that Kickstarter had 47,000 comments, which is over twice as many as the Veronica Mars Movie Project did. And it's astounding to me that the Homestuck Adventure Game Kickstarter, which is, by the way, for a game that's not going to come out for years.
Right.
And I also, as I noted to you guys earlier, I think that the backer number would have even been higher, except there was a huge amount of coordinating between fans to band together to like get those $400 high tier.
To pool their money. Yeah,
because there's a lot of exclusive merch kind of involved in those higher tier ones, and if they wanted to get the tarot, I think a lot of people
get
the tarot deck and then split the cards up amongst themselves.
Oh, cute.
Which is, that makes a lot of sense.
No, it does.
So I feel like that just kind of distorts those numbers a little bit.
Yeah.
But I keep looking at this and being like, and I'm now going to contrast this with an experience I had a couple weeks ago. I'm in the process of working out some deals with a book that it doesn't actually matter. I was talking to some publishing people a couple weeks ago, and these are prominent agents, like people who are way more important than I am. And I have a webcomic I've been doing on my own time, which is a similar kind of text adventure style, kind of really give the prompts, and then I draw pictures based on the prompts. There's a lot of them. Homestuck was one of them, Ruby Quest, that kind of thing. And so they were like, oh, I was reading your comic. I remember I used to play those text adventure games when I was a kid, so it was really nostalgic for me. I'm like, oh, well, it's a whole thing now, as pioneered by Andrew Hussey of Emmett's Paint Adventures, and they just kind of look at me blankly. And I'm like, oh, it's like the Homestuck guy. And then they continue to look at me blankly. And I just wanted to grab them by the shoulders and be like, you're only 30!
Well,
how do you not know what this is?
It blows my mind that our age range is still kind of the minority. Like, I remember I read the comic, and I had caught up, and it was early April, and I went to a convention. And I was like, oh, awesome. I'm so excited to, like, buy merchandise and to see other people. And I remember taking pictures, and I, like, live blogging it on Twitter, and I was like, oh, my God, I'm officially too old for my own game. Because everyone there was, like, 15. I remember drinking so heavily because I was like, I can't handle how many 16-year-old Briskas are standing around me right now. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. And then I remember the last day of the convention, sitting at a friend's booth, really hungover, and I looked up, and there was a 6-year-old dressed up as Carcat.
Oh my God.
That's so adorable!
Right? And I was like, he's so cute. And I looked at his mom, and I said, can I take his picture? And she said, yes. And she goes, okay, honey. And he looked at me like all cute, smiley 6-year-old, and then scowled for the picture.
That is awesome.
And I was like, there were so many children that would be there like dressed as Dave or dressed as a troll, and they'd be there with their parents. And I wanted to go to their parents and be like, you do know there's swearing in this comic, right? Like,
it makes me assume that the parent is the one reading it, and they're just looking over their shoulder at like the pictures or something. Like,
yeah,
no.
I mean, I don't think that 6-year-old actually read the comic. Like, but at the convention I was just at, there was like a 9 or 10-year-old girl dressed as Pfeffery, and she came up to our group and she saw our costumes, and of course everyone's like, "Oh my God, you're so cute, you sweetheart, you're adorable." And so we took her picture, and she's really sweet. And then she looked at us and she goes, I like your costumes too. They're adorable. And I was like, oh. So, right? And I'm just like, she knows something. What? Like, it was just, I'm just floored. Like, what does she know? Does she know that she's dead? Like,
so, oh my God. So here's the thing. I'm sorry. I know it feels like I'm probably being really repetitive here, but this seriously, this is the kind of thing that keeps me awake at night. Like, I feel like the larger publishing, like, everybody who is in publishing or comics who is not also in webcomics. Because I feel like webcomics people at least have a sense of, like, this is on the landscape, even if they don't pay any attention to it.
Mm.
They're treating they're treating the Homestuck Kickstarter as, like, this weird thing that just happened, and they're treating all these fans, I think to them it's like some kind of Gangnam Style thing. Just like a thing that all the kids are doing, and it's like some crazy thing that this phase that's last a little longer than maybe you would have expected, but is ultimately ephemeral. It doesn't mean anything.
I totally see that too.
Being crazy. And I'm like, this isn't Gangnam Style. This is like K-pop. Like, this is a large institution that is being created.
Yeah, it's not just
like,
one comic. It's
very complicated. It's also spawning other stuff. Like, it's now becoming like this crazy subculture, this whole huge thing. And not only that, it's I don't like to be rude to my colleagues, and if any of my colleagues are watching this, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be rude or to talk down to you. And probably, if you know me personally, you're not a jerk anyway, because none of my friends are jerks. But when people make jokes and are totally dismissive about Homestuck and its success, it feels like a YA publisher being totally dismissive about Twilight. It's like, look, you cannot like this. You can think it's stupid, and you can think the people who like it are stupid. But it is irresponsible of you to not at least make some effort to understand why it's popular, what it is that people are... Because people are clearly getting something out of it. Like,
I think this is like it's a good segue talking about how big it is, and how it's just more than just like a simple comic and a phase that people are going through. The fact that a lot of people thought that 4/13, April 2013 was going to be when the comic would end. And, he's since said, no, you'll know when it's going to end. You'll know when it's coming up. But the idea that, I remember when he said there's going to be a mega hiatus, my first thought was, good, I'm not ready for it to be over. And then thinking, well, he could end the comic tomorrow. It's not going to change the fact that I've still got, my room is the floor is covered in fabric for my next costume. I've got all the posters. I've got all these different things. And I'm like, if he ended it tomorrow, if he posted that said, I'm sick of this, I'm not doing this anymore, or he was just like, the end, this is over, or he wrapped it up, in a timely, normal fashion where everyone was pleased, which I doubt will actually happen, but where most people were pleased.
Mm-hmm. I'd be happy with like 60%.
But this is still going to go on. Like, when you go to conventions and you still see people cosplaying Cardcaptor Sakura, like that's been over for, 10 plus years. There's lots of canons that have been long since passed that people are still dressed up as. There's
gargoyles.
Yeah. People will always write fanfic. People will always draw fan art. These, Homestuck adventures, these different things, I think once it kind of ends, too, some of the moratorium on what fandom art can be sold will kind of be lifted as well. Like, this is going to continue on long after it's finished. And
I think that we're not going to really, by we, I mean, like, people in general.
We.
are not going to really be able to have a sense of how many people were reading this just quietly, because most readers are just reading it and then they move on with their lives. Like, fandom is percentage of the total readership, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, we don't think we're going to have a sense of how many people were reading this and how formative it was until, like, 5 to 10 years from now, when all those people are now the creators, the professionals, like, and then they're talking about their influences or their, like, drawing nostalgic fan art or whatever. And I think Cardcaptor Sakura is a perfect example of exactly what I mean, where it's like, or frankly, like Digimon. Like, I didn't realize that Digimon was a huge thing until very recently. All those people started aging into my industry.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden there's, like, a lot of people for whom it was clearly super formative, but they're, like, 5 or 6 years younger than me, so I didn't know about it. And I feel like this is going to be, like, a similar thing. And then all of a sudden we're going to be, like, having interview upon interview with, like, the hot young comic artist and they're 25 being like, oh, yeah, well, I got my start doing, like, Homestuck flashes, but... like, I just really liked Promstuck, and I wanted to do something like that,
Yeah, it reminds me of a Derrida quote, which I am loosely going to interpret here. We'll never know the meaning of the archive until tomorrow. There is no way to tell what Homestuck is going to be in 5 years from now, and it's really important to remember that content aside, it's changing the medium. It's evolving webcomics into something that they weren't before. It's something that can only exist online right now. And yeah, you can write a book, but how are you going to put a walkthrough in a book?
It's just not going to be the same.
Yeah, it's something that you need an internet connection to experience and to truly get the intended value out of.
Right. I mean, I guess to me, I remember how important it was when I was reading it in the beginning, and all of a sudden I was like, wait, these kids don't actually like know each other face to face. They met over the internet and they're really, really close, important friends. And I remember thinking, that speaks to me, because of course I have friends that I've met through work, through school, through general face-to-face human interactions, but some of my really close best friends I met over the internet. And that, this idea of you just know these people over the internet, you're going to go on some kind of magical quest to save the world and save their lives with these people you've never met before. And to me, I'm like, of course I would. Of course that makes sense. Of course I would do that in a heartbeat. That sounds awesome. But other people that would never experience that would be like, they don't even know each other. And that translates into media, and that would be something that some people just could not wrap their head around.
That could also be a great reason why the fandom is so young. Like, people who are in their 20s and younger, they grew up with their internet friends. Like, my group of internet friends are who I consider to know me the best, because I was so, like, they were there in my formative years. And that's why Homestuck speaks to me so well. It's like, yes, I totally understand the feeling of having your best friends be a million miles away and, having 8,000 plus pages and never meeting them. Like, that's my life.
Well, all the most important people in my life I met through the internet, either directly or indirectly.
Yeah, same.
Like, my husband went to school with my internet friend's boyfriend. And my roommate I met in Avatar fandom, like in somebody else's live journal comments.
Yeah, I mean,
In my
to
main-
us,
yeah.
it's so normal. To us, that makes sense, and to I think a significant portion of the Homestuck fandom. I think if you started reading and that didn't make sense, you then realized, hey, this was a whole new avenue that I can make friends and make connections, and these people are just as real to me as, I'm making air quotes, real life friends. So if that wasn't something that you could immediately relate to, that now it's sort of opened this, that it's revolutionized the way that we could present comics, I think, but it's also changed the way that you could present friendships. That
Yeah, definitely.
to me that makes perfect sense, but to other people, you know, this might have been their first introduction to online friendships.
I'm going to make myself look even older than I already look by saying that my main regret about Homestuck fandom is that it's post-LiveJournal. It's a Tumblr fandom. It kills me.
Dude, LiveJournal is like the...
I lost you.
Yeah, I can't hear you.
No.
I'm here. It just got quiet. I think my computer.
Is everybody good?
Yeah.
I think we're good. So you were starting to say something about LiveJournal, which I always want to hear.
I don't think it's that the death of LiveJournal is that long ago. I think it's quite recent.
Yeah.
It feels recent to me.
But I feel like Homestuck was always a Tumblr fandom.
Oh right, yeah. LiveJournal was dead. Well, not dead. LiveJournal in America was on the outs by the time.
Out of fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just because it feels, I feel like my experience with Homestuck Tumblr fandom is like my version of most people's relationship with Homestuck, which is that it just feels so huge and impenetrable to me.
Yeah, Tumblr is also, whereas LiveJournal was, at least the LiveJournal of old was much more accessible, and you could go from blog to blog and look at comments, and everything was kind of laid out in a more unified, formative way. Whereas Tumblr is huge, and there's not a very good search function, and all the blogs are very separate, but all the content could be reblogged to someone else's. So it's much more formidable to kind of tackle it. So I think that Tumblr fandom by far, any Tumblr fandom maybe, would be difficult to...
And I think there's a sense of everything being public. Like, it's so flat. Like, it's not like with LiveJournal where you had a sense that, all right, I'm in this person's space right now. I'm in their journal and their comments. And I'm going to sort of shape my own behavior accordingly, and they likewise can kind of control to a certain extent what's happening in their space. Whereas I feel like, I mean, and again, I'm sorry, I don't mean to turn this into yet another conversation about Tumblr fandom versus LiveJournal fandom. But I feel like the flatness combined with the hugeness, where it's like, sometimes I definitely, there's a lot of things, even if I made a Tumblr post about like Homestuck meta, I would hesitate to tag it.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't want to be, I'd feel like I was throwing myself into this ocean of strangers.
Well, it's such a big canon and such a big fandom, and then it takes place on this huge medium that is Tumblr, that I can't imagine how anyone could look at that and from the outside and not think that's completely impenetrable. That's too big.
So, I don't know, I actually don't know if this is related or not, but can you guys explain what happened with the whole Know Your Meme thing? Because I totally...
Long story short, the website and the production team are completely different teams on opposite coasts of the country. And they filmed the Homestuck episode without any consultation from the writing team on the script or just anything. Like, I found out by a post of them in horns, and I was like, it was tag Know Your Meme on Tumblr, and I was like, hi, this is my job. What's going on here? And it was just terrible. They left out a lot of things. They made it look like oh, Homestuck is a meme itself, when it should have been presented as a subculture. Like, this is a fandom that is something super, it's something that's super important, and it's sucks to us because... I'm sorry?
That has like its own memes within it, but it's not itself a meme. Yeah. Exactly.
And the same week that came out was the PBS Idea Channel video comparing Homestuck to Ulysses, which is amazing, and I highly recommend that everyone watch it. If you want a primer on Homestuck, if you're not a fan, please watch it. It explains it way better than the KYM episode. But the backlash was crazy. I actually gave a talk at a convention once, and they were like, "Oh, you're the girl from Know Your Meme?" There were about 13 girls cosplaying, and I was talking to them in a girls' bathroom. They laughed at me. I was just standing there, and they were like, "No, go away," and just laughed. And it's really embarrassing as a fan because it's something that I really do care about, and just because a production team wanted to put out a video, like, it's hurting me. And
So
I
you're sort of
feel,
experiencing this whole conflict, like as a microcosm.
yeah,
It's like your own personal experience. Like, that's really interesting, actually.
yeah. And on Reddit, I know there's been several threads about the video on Reddit that I've actually commented in, and a couple of the moderators who are huge Homestuck fans have commented in. And it's, I just want people to take away that the video is not representative of the fandom at all, because it was not made by fans. And they did not consult fans. At the time, I wasn't as big of a fan as I am now, and we have several huge Homestuck fans on the moderator team that I would have loved to have their input on the episode, and it just didn't happen, and we got shafted. It is my biggest regret of my job.
Gosh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be like telling me about your pain.
I have so many feels about this. I'm sorry.
No, I like your feels.
It looked like we got some comments before on Twitter about how we were saying Homestuck is a Tumblr fandom. You know, Homestuck is not just a Tumblr fandom; it's a forum fandom, it's a DA fandom, it's all over the place. It had a live journal presence too in IRC, and there's a whole section of Homestuck fans that participate on the MSPA forums, etc. Yeah, I mean that exists. It would be irresponsible for us to say that Homestuck only exists on the Tumblr fandom.
Oh God, I'm that person who says that Sugar Quill is the only Harry Potter fandom.
Oh,
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, we wouldn't mean. I think
I know it's bigger than that. I'm sorry.
I know my personal participation is only on Tumblr, but of course there are a million other mediums for people to talk about Homestuck. I'm sure that there's, you know, I do cosplay, and there's tons of people on like cosplay.com and other cosplay websites that specifically talk about Homestuck there, not just about the cosplay, but about the actual canon. And I would, if I had to make a guess, I would say a lot of the younger fans maybe gravitate towards Tumblr, and that's possible, but they could also be a million other places. Like,
yeah,
none of us are experts on where the Homestuck fans are. Like, we can't tell you where everyone is. Yeah. A lot of people are on Tumblr, but a lot of people are everywhere else too.
Yeah, I got a much better sense of that when. So you guys remember, like, they did the fan album last year?
Yeah.
Was that last year? God, my sense of time.
God, yeah.
My Homestuck time is terrible. Recently-ish, they did the fan album, and my roommate actually and they ended up accepting that he had made a contribution to the contest, which ended up on the album. That was really exciting. But when I was waiting. People were kind of all posting their music on Tumblr and on the forums and kind of talking about it. And I, of course, being now suddenly really interested in this because my good friend was doing a submission, started poking around to sort of see what the conversation was. And I found giant communities of super active Homestuck conversation in the process of tracking down people talking about submissions to the fan album that I had no idea. Like I always underestimate how busy the MSPA forums are, for one thing. Because, like, I always think of, like, official forums as being, like, kind of dead and not much ever happens there, but that doesn't actually seem to be the case with Homestuck fandom at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a presence pretty much everywhere, and unless you're looking for it... I don't know. I mean, for me, it feels like you have to be looking for it in order to find it, but maybe to people who are outside of the fandom, that they're like, you guys are everywhere.
I find Tumblr the most overwhelming, though, because even before I was a fan and before I followed like Homestuck-specific blogs, I could not go a day without seeing something Homestuck-related on my blog. So
yeah, I am not a big tagger, but I tag all my Homestuck stuff because I have some Tumblr savior users who will unfollow me if I don't.
Yeah, I started a Homestuck specific blog because I had people who were like, I've been following you for your cat pictures. I don't want to see your trolls. I was like, fine.
Whatever.
It looks like we've hit the hour and 10-minute mark, so we should probably wrap up. Is there anything that any of us should say as a final note?
I was just going to, I know you guys this has been amazing and great, and I've learned so much, even though I haven't really contributed, but I have been listening attentively, and I hope all our viewers enjoyed it. One thing that we tend to do as a wrap-up for fandom spotting episodes is one great thing in fandom this week, and it can be about Homestuck, but it can be about anything else, and we'll provide links to them at the end of the episode when it goes up on Tumblr. So if there's anything, the last one that I was on, baseball season had just started, and I think baseball is as crazy a fandom as anything. So I called baseball my favorite thing of the week in fandom. So anything like that, you guys feel free to jump in.
Does it have to be recent, or can it be in general from the entire fandom?
Yeah, it could be something that you saw this week that's not new, something that happened to you this week in fandom, or something you just really want to wreck.
I would want to recommend, because I was at a convention and we were talking about Homestuck with our little group, and this one girl mentioned, or someone made a Promstuck reference, and she was like,
Promstuck.
And she said, "What's Promstuck?" And they're like, "Oh,
how do you not know?
Summer child, sweet summer child, what do you know of Promstuck?"
Oh my god, Promstuck.
If I could recommend anything for anyone that's into Homestuck, or I guess not even into Homestuck, but probably if you're into Homestuck and you are listening to this and saying, "I don't know what Promstuck is," Google that right now and just make that your Sunday afternoon, because it's a good use of your time.
My favorite thing this week is a very specific Tumblr post. I will send the link to someone to put it in the tab, but it's this post made by the mayor of Cairns, and it is the Beta Kids as ice cream. And I am completely obsessed with this, and I can't stop looking at it. So it's really adorable.
So I feel like I'm going to cheat a little bit and have two-ish kinds of things that are sort of the same thing. And that I feel like my big Homestuck fandom thing, and there was something recent-ish, so I can pretend like this is recent, super over-ambitious animation or fan video projects. Like, I think it's Guzu Sur. I'm going to have to make the link because I can never remember how to pronounce this.
Yes, it
super elaborate, minutes-long fan animation that she's been working on and off for ages. And if you're a recent fan and maybe haven't seen it, you really, it's like Promstuck level of you really need to, this is one of the best things that fandom has done, and I wish for you to consume it because it will make you happy. Combined with, is it Xmag who does these? Now I'm embarrassed that I'm forgetting which fan artist, who basically listens to appropriate songs that you would normally edit a fan video to, and then draws beautiful illustrations to go with each individual line of the song. And then
I think a couple people do that. There's Cal Scratch does.
Yeah, there's
a fair
one girl
amount.
who's done a bunch that I particularly liked, but yeah, there's a few people who kind of do this, and then actually usually I think their fans then go and edit them to the music and put them on YouTube, and it just makes me so happy. Like, nothing makes me happy the way that really talented, dedicated fans creating genuinely entertaining presentations of the sort. Just, it fills me with glee. It's like it's both contributing this awesome thing to fandom, and it's I'm just happy that people who are that talented and dedicated exist in the world. So yeah, that's my thing.
Well, thank you guys so much. We will put up links to all of these and theoretically have a download situation available. I'm going to try and make that work. This has been episode 29. It's been amazing. Thank you all for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed listening to you guys. Our next episode is going to be about the Avengers, just in time for the movie. So all of you who have been listening, if you're interested, you might as well stick around for that. So thank you to each of the panelists. Thank you for everybody who's been listening and writing in questions. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you for having us.